Response. Year of Learning by Sue and Arnie Gerlich in memory of Malka Pearl Mann and Philip Mann, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl Renner Rav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, and Yerifka Pearl Rosner Bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of persons murdered in the Holocaust, Rav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sora Bas Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, Adidya Bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam Bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel Bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch, and Shmuel ben Arav Tzvi Hirsch. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova, Bas Yisrael Dov. Charlie Gelfenstein, Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata Bas Asher. Friends of Nina Moinister, Nechama Asna Bas Yitzchak Aaron. Friends of Steve Vigder, Simcha Melech ben Meir Lev Halevi. Friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece, Leah Bracha. Month of Learning, David and Mindel Cheslow in memory of his father, Moshe ben Reuven Mordechai. Susan and Reuven Podolsky in memory of her father, Simcha Bunim ben Yoshua, and in memory of her mother, Chaya Bas Avram Dov. Haran and Mel Haller in memory of her father, Yosef Eliezer ben Tzvi Hirsch. B. Pizer in memory of her father, Yisachar Dov ben Shmuel. Stanley Presser in memory of his wife, Chayalea Bas Zev HaKohen. A Week of Learning, Judy and Michael Peretsky in memory of her mother, Razel Bas Yehuda Lev. What's today's date?
Today, Yud Dalet. How could you forget?
14th, so
15,
that's tomorrow.
15.
Yud Dalet is the 14th, is the way I count.
15.
No, the 14th. Pesach Sheni is the 14th, just as Pesach is the 14th. 15th is Chag HaMatzos. People make that mistake. The day that's the 14th is Pesach. The 15th is Chag HaMatzos. In any event, that exhausts it. We have a couple tomorrow. We're going to also dedicate to, if I can have, I'm today's the 15th on the secular calendar. All right, I have to go back then. I apologize. Day of Learning and Torah Fund for Judy Fuchs in memory of her husband, Dov Ber ben Eliyahu. And a Day of Learning by Judy and Ari Cohen in memory of their friend, Dov Ber ben Eliyahu. Okay, and I apologize to them for confusing the Jewish date and the secular date. We also today are making a special effort to dedicate the learning in a schus for a refuah shalema for Esther Leah Bas Zlata. That's Mel's wife, who has been having some difficulty, and she's seeing a physician this morning for tomorrow morning. So we should have done it tomorrow. What are you jumping the gun? All right. Okay. Samich Tes Amid Aleph. So we've been discussing circumstances under which a woman can eat truma. And we've been discussing there are people that can prohibit her from eating truma, and there are people who can permit her to eat truma. Just a simple example, a Bas Yisrael gets married, her husband to a Kohen, her husband can permit her to eat truma. A Bas Yisrael has a child with a Kohen, even if the Kohen dies, the child can permit her to eat Truma. If a Bas Kohen is married to Israel, she cannot eat Truma. But if she leaves the Kohen, he dies, or he throws her out, and she had no offspring, then she can go home to her tati and eat Truma. So those are, but then there are other cases where a person would permanently disqualify her from eating Truma. Like if a woman has sex with a man she may not marry lechatchila, an almana to the Kohen Gadol, that's like that. So the Gemara explains, Mi sheyesh lo almana sugerushin ba yotzo. If a person can enable her to become a widow, or can enable her to become a divorcee, then that person would be able to let her go home. What that would exclude is Yotze Eved Kachavim, the Eved She'ein Lo Almana Sigarushin. Since we do not recognize a marriage between a Jewish woman and a slave or a non-Jew, that marriage, she's living in the guy's apartment, she may be in his bed, but they're not married no matter what ceremony or ceremonies they've gone through. Therefore, if that relationship terminates through death or splitting up, we do not consider it that she's a widow or a divorcee. Therefore, that would not allow her to go home and eat Truma by Tati. Ashkechan Kohenes. So now here's an interesting. So we've learned, if you were here yesterday, we had a whole bunch of complicated psukim, and we were trying to prove up that the rules are pretty much the same for a Bas Kohen, except if she has illicit sex, she gets roasted. But other than that, the rules are pretty much the same. Bas Kohen, a Bas Levi, or a Bas Yisrael. And we went through a bunch of psukim. We challenged them, we changed them, we reestablished them. It was complicated. So, Ashkechan Kohenes. So, okay, we accept that we went through psukim that established these rules for a Bas Kohen. Levia Yisraelis Minolan. How do we know that the same set of rules apply to the daughter of a Levi or a Yisrael? Keda Omer Rav Ava Bar Omer Rav. In another halacha, I think it's in Ksubas, he proves an extra word, ubas, a vav, and then the word dubas, and a daughter or a daughter. And he proves that expands the din, and you can do a limud from that extra word. So bas, over there it says bas ubas, and he learns an extra halacha from it. Hachinami, we had our pasuk here, bas and ubas. There was a vav by the bas. And that expands this concept to both the daughter of a Levi and the daughter of a Yisrael. Come on. Remember, we've learned many times darshaning vavin is somewhat controversial. K'derevi Akiva, the Doresh vavin. We established that the ubas we can darshan based on Rebbe Akiva's principle of darshaning with extra vavin. Gemara says afila tema rabbanan. You could even say this ruling is not just Rebbe Akiva. It would apply even to everybody else. Why? Kula ubas kra yiserahi. If you look at the pasuk carefully, if you erase the word ubas from the pasuk altogether, it would have the identical meaning. So the word ubas is an extra word, and we know that you can darshan from extra words and thus expand it to all girls. The aim, but maybe we would say like this. Mishi yesh lo almanas ugerushin ba. Anybody who has the ability to turn her into a widow or a divorcee, meaning a legitimate husband, ki lesle zera ka'achla, and if she terminates her relationship either through his death or a divorce with a non-Kohen, with who blocked her from eating truma if she's a bas Kohen and from her father's house, when their marriage is terminated, if she has no offspring, she can return to Tati and eat truma there. If she does have offspring, she cannot go home to Tati. On the other hand, Misha Ein Lo Almanasu Gerushin Ba, a person who has no ability to turn her into a widow or a gerusha. That means an illicit relationship with a slave or a non-Jew. Okay. Afal gafte isle zera nami techel. Maybe why don't we flip it and say, since this relationship was illicit, she's still just the bas Cohen and she could have 50 kids. It wouldn't matter. She could go home and eat. So the Gemara says, Im Cain, if you're going to make that kind of foolish argument, Riboy Levi of Israelis Lomali. Why would you even entertain the possibility of expanding the rule to a non-Kohanic woman who marries into a Kohanic family? Or Rabbi Akiva, the Omar Ein Kedushin Taisvin, B'chayve Lavin. Rabbi Akiva goes so far as to say that a marriage that's not valid lechatchila, but that the Rabbanan says is valid b'di'evet, like a Kohen Gadol to an almana. But it is toifes. To terminate that marriage, you have to give a get. If the guy dies, she is an almana. They're just doing something wrong. But Rabbi Akiva says that marriage is invalid from the get-go. Again, it's just the same as marrying a goy. He's a das yachid on that. Umay ki tehiyel ish zar. So then what would the pasuk mean when it says she's with a man who is strange? Now here the word zar has really two meanings. Ish zar on one level means a man who's not a Kohen. And therefore her status diminishes from being a bas Kohen to being Eishes Yisrael. It also could mean somebody strange, meaning somebody not Jewish, or even somebody Jewish who, for whatever reason, cannot marry a regular Jewish girl. A couple come to mind: a mamzer, a Moavi. We know the story of Ruth, and she could marry Boaz. And you tend to think that only a Moabite woman can become Jewish. No, a Moabite man can too. But he has to marry either a convert or a freed slave or a mamzeres. He can't marry a regular girl.
3 generations.
What?
3 generations.
I can't hear you.
By an Egyptian?
Egyptian is 3 doros. And we're going to get that in a little bit. Okay. So my Tihiya Ishzar, that the Kohen's daughter marries an outsider, a zar, ki to boil. It's that pasuk now simply means she is with, meaning she gets to bed with him. It doesn't have anything to do with sanctity of marriage. It just means that the bas Kohen had a sexual encounter with an outsider. Okay, so Almana v'gerusha l'amali. So then why does the pasuk have to go on to say an almana or a gerusha? There's no, what's the point of that? Almana lahachmir oleha. So it turns out that the word almana becomes a chumrah, and the word gerusha lahakel aleha becomes a kula, and the Gemara is going to explain it. But tzricha, and we need both words. We need both the chumrah and the kula. Te'i ashma in an almana. If we only learned the word almana, almanahu dechiles le zera achla. Only a widow who did not have children by the dead husband would be able to go home and eat truma. Why? Mashum the chazia kahuna. Because she may marry a Kohen Hedyot. A Kohen Hedyot can marry a widow. Okay? Aval Gerusha. But a Gerusha, a divorcee, the lo chazia kahuna. She may not marry a Kohen Hedyot if she's a divorcee. Aim, I might have guessed, afal gafta lesle zera lo ochlo. Even if she had no children, the label Gerusha means that she can't go home to Tati and eat truma. So we need it. The E Ashmin and Gerusha. And if we only had the word divorcee, which is a kula, Gerushahu, Dechi Isle Zera Lo Achla, it's only a divorcee who has children who cannot eat.
If she doesn't have children,
Vishum Delo Chazia Kahuna, because she's not allowed to marry into Kahuna again. Avo Almana, the Chazia Kahuna, but the Almana, who could, after all, marry a Kohen now. Aim, I might have guessed, Afal Gafta Isle Serenami Teichol. Maybe even though she has a bunch of kids, she could go home to her father's house and eat truma. Okay, so it's a tzricha. So we need both lashonos to explain that she can go home in either case without children. Okay, so but maybe the concept of Ema Nivala Lapuzzle of Hachazir Gerushasai. Maybe we could extend the rule that a woman who slept with someone who lechatchila could not marry her, but he did, and it's typhus. And then the rabbis say to him, look, you're a Kohen, you're married to this Gerusha, you can't duchen anymore, get rid of her. So he gives her a divorce, and then he remarries her. What? Okay, maybe that's what the pasuk's talking about. Leishzar, it says, Omer Rachmana. Mishazar etzlo meikora. If we're going to do this interpretation, it means the word zar doesn't mean a non-Kohen. It means a man she's not allowed to marry. La'afukei, to exclude a former husband. She was Isbas Kohen, married to Israel, perfectly normal. He then divorces her. She has no other interim in relationships. He may remarry her. The laws are etzla mikorahi, because he was not forbidden to her, azar to her initially. Rabbi Yossi Saver Kohen Gadol. And Rabbi Yossi says that the nature of the disqualifying relationship has to be analogous to the disqualifying relationships in the case of a Kohen Gadol. Ma Kohen Gadol Shazaro Posel Posel. If the Kohen Gadol marries someone who's not a virgin, and even a young woman, a Bogeres, according to some Shitas, his children are halal. And when they marry, they would posel. So therefore, at the Kohen Gadol, whose offspring is disqualified because marrying a woman lechatchila is not supposed to. His children become halalim. And their marriages would posel their wives. If a halal marries a bas kohen, she can never eat truma again. She can't go home to father. What? What has she?
My Gemara started Yehochanan for this.
Did I skip a page?
No, no.
Okay. Af kohen gadol shazaro pasul uposel. Af kol shazaro pasul uposel. So maybe we would look by that analogy and say any relationship where the offspring would be non-pure kahanim, would be halal, and would be posel, they also have, the woman is also puzzle from eating truma. La fuke mitzri sheni, okay, the ein zera puzzle. Okay, somebody mentioned this earlier. If an Egyptian man converts to Judaism, he is not allowed to marry, let's call it a regular Jewish girl. He has to marry a convert or a freed slave or a mamzeres. If it's a mamzeres, all the children forever would be mamzerim, so let's leave her out. His child, the second generation, also has to marry out, outside of the kahal. The third generation is kosher to everybody. So if the definition is his children are puzzle, then he is a posel. That would exclude a second generation Egyptian because his children are just fine. So if he marries a bas kohen, according to this shita, and then he dies, she would be able to go home to her father. That would be the case. La'afuki Mitzri Sheni, a second generation Egyptian, the Ein Zara Puzzle, because his children would not be disqualifiers. Why? The pasuk says, Bonim Asher Yavaldu lahem dor shlishi. By the time you get to the children of the third generation, Yavu lahem bakal Hashem. They can marry anybody they want. Okay, so now what's the difference between Reb? Okay, now Reb Shimon said, Reb Shimon ben Gamaliel kol she'ata noise bito ata noise almanaso. He defines it this way. Anytime the person's daughter is an eligible spouse to you, his widow, were he to die, would also be an eligible spouse to you. And the corollary is, if for some reason you cannot marry his daughter, then you would not be able to marry his widow. So Ma'ika ben Reb Yossi, Rabban Shimon and Gamaliel, they sound like they're saying the same thing. The children posel, they're posel. Omar Ula, so Ula comes up with a case. Ger Amoini Umuavi Ikabanayo. The offspring of a Ammonite or a Moabite convert would disqualify the women with whom they have bia, because their children are also disqualified, and that disqualification is forever. So that would be the distinction. Whereas the Egyptian is only, according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, only one level. Okay. V'shnehem lo lamudua ela b'kohen gadol b'almana. And whichever view you take, interestingly, they both go to the exact same pasuk to prove their point. Rabbi Yossi Savar, he takes the pasuk and he says, Ma kohen gadol ba'amana shazara pasul uposel. Just as the children of a Kohen Gadol who marries a widow, that woman becomes puzzled eating truma, and their children are posel. Af kol shazara pasul posel. Any union where the child would be a blocker of his wife or eating truma or returning to eat truma, he also would disqualify any woman. He's not allowed to eat truma. He would disqualify anyone he marries from eating truma. Rav Shimon Gamliel Soiver takes the same pasuk. Ma kohen gadol ba'amana shekol zara pasulu posel. Just as the Kohen Gadol married to an almana, any offspring of that relationship is a halal. He is puzzled from eating truma, and he's posel. He bars his wife or his mother, for instance, from eating truma. Sha'af shekol zera puzzle posel. So too, it would disqualify any woman. La'afuke amoni u'moavi. This would not include an Ammonite or a Moabite, because there are circumstances where their children are not puzzled. If an Ammonite or a Moabite marries a convert, or if it's the female Moabite, Rus, so all of a sudden her children are just fine. So that's not, you can't make the global argument that their children are puzzle and posel in all cases. And that would be the nafkamina between the two of them. Okay, we're now on the Mishnah near the bottom of the page. And we have to hold cup. We're talking here, first at least, about a Kohen and a Bas Yisrael. We may also be talking about a Yisrael and a Bas Kohen, but let's start and look at it from the perspective of a Kohen and a Bas Yisrael. Ha'ones, if a Kohen rapes a girl. Ha'mefate, if a man seduces a woman, where now she is willing, but they're not married. Hashaita, a person who is incapable of cognitive thought, so he can't be kona a wife. You know, he could go through a marital ceremony, but since he's not considered sound mind, he can't buy something, and then the process of getting a wife is, quote, buying, unquote. Okay. Lo poslin would not disqualify a woman from eating truma, velo ma'achlin, but they do not enable a woman to eat truma. So let's go back. If a girl is raped, if she's a Bas Kohen, she may eat truma because she was raped. If she's a Yisraelis, and the guy who rapes her or seduces her is a Kohen, so her father gets his shotgun out, and he says, "Pay me or marry her." So he says, "Okay, I'll marry her." She can't eat truma because he can't disqualify, but he cannot enable.
She can't eat from ever?
Correct. Well, how could a Bas Yisrael ever eat truma? Only if she marries a Kohen. But this Kohen raped her first. So now she's disqualified from eating Kohen, even though she's now a Bas Kohen.
Either she's allowed to be his wife, or
she has to be his wife. She doesn't have any choice in the matter. Her father decides. What? That's the rule. Because she, after all, she had an illicit sexual activity. Right. And we mentioned earlier that we don't really use the word zona right. She is classified as zona even though she's a rape victim.
Right.
And a zona can't marry a Kohen. But in this case, she has to marry the Kohen. So the marriage is valid, except to Rabbi Akiva. But the benefits of marriage, of eating truma, are not afforded to her. It's not really punishing her. It's just a consequence of the way things are. Okay? Vim einon ru'in lavo b'Yisrael. But if one of these men, the rapist, the seducer, is not fit to enter to marry a Jewish girl, hare elu paislim, they would disqualify her from truma in all cases. Okay, so if she's a Bas Yisrael, she is disqualified from eating truma, even if 10 years later she marries a different fellow who happens to be a Kohen. Or if she happens to be a Bas Kohen and a non-Jew rapes her, she would never be able to go home to her father to eat truma. Okay? So now the Mishnah keeps going. Ketzad, how does this work? Hare Yisrael Shaba Abbas Kohen. If an is a Jewish man has an illicit relationship with her, rape or seduction, Teichel Betruma, she may still go home and eat truma with her father, even if she was a willing participant in this relationship. Ibura, what if that relationship, that rape results in an infant? Lo toichel betruma. She can no longer eat truma because of the general rule, the daughter of a Kohen who bears the child of a Yisrael, she now has a child, she can't go home and eat truma. Okay? Nechtach ha'uber b'meya, if it says the baby's cut up. If the baby dies in utero, but has not come out, in other words, they do the ultrasound and the baby's dead. And the doctor says, we could take it out, but you're close to bearing it. It will be safer for you to bear it. Unfortunately, these things happen where a woman continues carrying a non-live baby. In any event, now she's not pregnant anymore, even though there's a fetus inside her. But she's not pregnant with a viable child. Teichel, she can go back to Tati and eat truma. Okay. Next. Hare Kohen Shaba Bas Yisrael. It's a Kohen that rapes or seduces a Jewish girl. Lo teichel b'truma. She cannot eat truma be based on the relationship with the Kohen. And Ibura, if she gets pregnant from that relationship. Now this is interesting. Lo tochal. She still can't eat truma. Why? Because of one of the two reasons we had the other day. Either the baby is considered part of her and is not yet a Kohen, or it's simply not a person until it's born, and therefore not a Kohen. We had those the other day. Yolda, as soon as she gives birth to the baby, whose father was a rapist Kohen, Tochal. Now she can eat truma because her son is a legitimate Kohen. He's not a mamzer. They're both Jewish. And she wasn't married to anybody else. So the baby is it has Kohanic blood. And based on the baby, she can now eat truma, even though she's not married to the baby's father. Okay? So it turns out, Nimtza Kachel Shel Ben Gadol Mekach Shel Av. Turns out that in terms of enabling this woman to eat truma, the baby has got more power than the father did. The father's relationship with her does not entitle her to eat truma, even if he later marries her. But the baby, by simply being born, can enable her to eat truma. Okay, now.
Is where the expression comes from, babies bring their own nozzle?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I didn't know that expression. Okay, the baby is stronger than the tati. All right. Now, the next rule, Eved Paisel Mishum Bia. As soon as a slave has sex with a woman, that woman cannot eat truma ever again, not if she marries a Kohen, not if she's a Bas Kohen, goes home to her father. The Enuposel Mishum Zera. But it does not count, the product of such a marriage does not count as offspring, child, to disqualify her from eating if that if the child gets married. We'll see in a minute. Ketzad, how does it work? Bas Yisrael, a Kohen, a Jewish girl marries a Kohen, or Bas Kohen Yisrael, or a Kohen's daughter marries a regular Yid, V'yolda Hamenu Ben, and she has a child. Okay? So this couple have a child. One of them is she's a Kohuna, a Kohenes, or he's a Kohen. V'holach haben v'nichvas al hashivcha. And the son of this couple rapes a slave girl. V'yolda hamenu ben. And the slave girl bears a child based on that rape. Hareze Evet. That baby is a slave. Because she's a slave, the child takes the identity of the mother. So even though this child is a Kohen's grandchild or a Kohenes's grandchild, the baby is a slave. Hoisa im aviv bas Yisrael Kohen. Now, if the parents, the father, she's not a Kohenes, but she's married to a Kohen, lo teichel b'truma. Now, the intermediate son dies. So the only living relative is this slave grandson. She cannot eat truma because she's not considered to have offspring from a Kohen. Bas Kohen Yisrael, if the girl was a Kohenes and now the husband died, the slave child is their only offspring. Okay, so get the picture. Mrs. Cohen is a widow. Her only living descendant is a Canaanite slave that has Kohanic blood because her husband was a Kohen and her son was a Kohen, and the slave has Kohen blood. The slave, Teichel Betruma, that grandchild would enable her to eat truma as if it were her child, because it doesn't matter if it's a great grandchild. Any living descendant, if the intermediate people are gone, is the one you look at. So that's a weird case. Okay. Mamzer posel. A mamzer would disqualify a Kohen's daughter from eating truma. Umaychil, but he would, if he's a mamzer Kohen, he would enable the woman he marries to eat truma. Okay, Kate, son, how does that work? Bas Yisrael, the Kohen, Bas Kohen, Yisrael, the same one, either one's a Kohen or a Kohenes. V'yolda himenu bas, and they have a daughter. V'holcha habas v'nisas le'eved ola avid kavod. And that great daughter of the Jewish couple goes and marries a slave. V'yolda himenu ben. Now the girl is the Jewess. So hareza mamzer. That baby is a mamzer. However, he's his mother's child and his grandmother's grandchild. V'hoise im imo bas Yisrael a Kohen. So if the mother is a bas Yisrael married to a Kohen, teichel b'truma. The grandmother, the mother died. The grandmother can eat truma based on the mamzer child. Okay? And Bas Kohen Yisrael. But if the woman was a Bas Kohen married to Yisrael, and the only child is this mamzer, the only living offspring is this mamzer. The mamzer has the level of a Yisrael mamzer, not a Kohen mamzer, and lo toichel v'truma, and the grandmother can't eat truma. Now we're going to get like perhaps the weirdest case of all. Kohen Gadol pa'amim shehu poisel. Sometimes the Kohen Gadol himself can bar his own paternal grandmother from eating truma. Ketzad. Bas Kohen liYisrael v'yoda himenu bas. A Jewish girl, a Bas Kohen, a Kohen's daughter, marries a Yisrael. The marriage produces a daughter. V'holcha bas v'nisas leKohen. And the girl is married to a Kohen. V'yolda himenu ben. And that marriage of the daughter marrying the Kohen produces a son. Harezeh Rui Lios Kohen Gadol. And this one is fit to be Kohen Gadol. He gets elected Kohen Gadol. Umishamish al Gavi Mizbeach. And on Yom Kippur, he stands on the Mizbeach and he does the Avodah. Michael es Imo. He would entitle his mother, the Bas Yisrael, to eat Truma. Opesel aim imo, but he would bar his grandmother to eating truma through him. And the grandmother, when she's having coffee with her friends, would make a wry comment. Zoison meres, this is what the bubby says. Lo kibni kohen gadol. There isn't that many Kohen Gedolim in history who posolani min a truma, who managed to disqualify me from eating truma. Okay. So now we're going to go back, and when we went through the Mishnah, we talked over and over about rape and seduction. But the Mishnah included also the shaita, and we're going to deal with that now. Tanya, the Tanya Rabbanan, the rabbis teach in another brisa a similar din. Shaita v'katan shenasu nashim umeisai. If a person who is not of sound mind goes through a marriage ceremony with a woman, or a boy between the ages of 9 days and 9 years and a day and 13 years and a day enters a marriage. Now they have functioning genitals, and their bia is called bia. And bia is a kinyan diraisa. But in the one case, he's not of sound mind. And in the other case, he's not old enough to make a kinyan. So we are in the following situation. Midrabanan, we have to acknowledge that something happened. There was this union. But midiraisa, the union never occurred. Now, what if the shaita or the kid never dies and there are no children, but the shaita has a pekuach son, a brother, or the little kid has an older brother? So what's the deal? No sehen peturos min chalitza umin hayibum. Since their marriage is not recognized halachically from the Torah perspective, the surviving siblings may not do yibum. And since it's only recognized rabbinically and chalitza is based on yibum, they're putter from doing chalitza also. So, Kate, now we're going back and globally talking about the Mishnah. So we just knocked off that missing element. Kate said, now going back to the Mishnah, how does all this work? Hare Yisrael Shabal Bas Kohen Teichel the Truma. If a non-Kohen has sex with a daughter of a Kohen, she still can eat Truma in her father's house. Of Ubra, if she gets pregnant, Lo Toichel, she may no longer eat Truma in her father's house because the baby disqualifies her prior to its birth for one of the reasons we learned earlier. Kevan to Ibura Lo Toichel, since when we know she's pregnant, we don't let her eat Truma. Why don't we say anybody who's raped can't eat Truma Bas Kohen until we give her a test and find out if she's pregnant or not, right? Lachuch Shema Ibura. Let's say any girl, any Bas Kohen in this case, who has a sexual encounter, whether willingly or unwillingly, we have to, as soon as possible, determine if she was pregnant or not. Milo Tanan, didn't we learn a Mishnah? We had this earlier. We had the case of Reuven and Shimon marry Sarah and Rivka in a double wedding, two weddings in the same hall. And the lights go out and everybody's scrambling around. And Reuven grabs Rivka and Shimon grabs Sarah. And each really thinks that with the right partner, and they go home and they consummate the marriage. And the next day the sun comes up and each guy is with the wrong girl. We had this case once before. So the halacha is that they can't immediately rejoin the proper spouse. They have to wait 3 months to determine if they were pregnant or not, right? Because if they're pregnant, that's a big problem, right? So, we separate both couples for 3 months. Shema me'uboros, because we're worried maybe that they're pregnant. Omar Rava bar Rav Huna le yuchasin chashashu. Here, the reason, now, so let me interrupt myself. So logically, if we separate these couples because they had sex with the wrong people to make sure they're not pregnant, why should we not isolate the Bas Kohen who had sex willingly or unwillingly until we determine if she's pregnant? So the Gemara replies, we're talking apples and oranges. When it comes to yichus, we're choshesh. We want to know who the proper father is. But when it comes to truma, nishkaferlach. If she was pregnant, so she ate truma. What's the big deal? That's the havamina of the Gemara. Omar Rava bar Rav Huna liyuchasin chashashu. We worry about yichus issues. L'truma lo chashashu, but when it comes to truma, nishkaferlach. L'truma lo chashashu, is it really so that with truma it's not a big deal? Vasanya, we have a brisa that says, a man, a Kohen, gives his wife, who's not a Bas Kohen, a get. And he said, here is your get. Sha'achas kaidem lemisasi. This get will be effective 23 seconds before I die of a heart attack. Now, this is not that unusual, because if a guy is going off to war and he gives the woman this kind of a get, so if he disappears, etc., etc. So, asura lechol betruma miyad. From the minute she gets that conditional get, she may never eat truma again. Why? Because she may put a piece of truma in her mouth and she's chewing it, and her husband drops dead, and it turns out she's a gerusha swallowing the truma. To swallow is what counts. So to prevent that possibility, we don't let her eat truma at all. So we see we are choshesh for truma. So that can't be the rationale. Ela Omer Rava bar Rav Huna b'nisuyin choshishu. When it comes to marriage, now you have to hold cup here. We worry about the potential of offspring. Biznus lo choshishu. But when it comes to illicit sex, be it rape, be it of willing, we don't worry about the possibility of offspring. Because if the girl is married, the whole point of getting married is the couple want to have children. So they're going to be thrilled and delighted, and they're not going to do anything to impede the pregnancy. But if a girl is seduced or raped, if she's seduced, she might use a moch. She might put a barrier so the semen can't enter her body. Or she might jump. The Gemara talked about jumping up and down, so the semen drains out of her. In today's world, she would take a barrier, a diaphragm, or she would take a morning after pill, because in that circumstance, by illicit sex, if she's a rapist, she doesn't want to bear a rapist child. And if it's her secret boyfriend, she doesn't want to get pregnant that everybody knows about him. So that's why we separate the married couple, but we're not choshesh for the illicit sex. Ubenisui and mi chosheshu. Is it really true that we're always choshesh when it comes to a marriage? We have a strange circumstance. Vasanya, we have a brisa. Bas Kohen shenisisei Israel umeis. The daughter of a Kohen marries a fellow, and the night after the wedding, they have bia, and then it's such an exciting event for him. He has a heart attack. He drops dead. Okay, so what happens? Toiveles v'acheles b'truma lorev. The husband died. They bury him the next morning. That night, the widow goes to the mikveh and goes home and eats truma by tati. Why didn't we worry about her becoming pregnant? Omer Rav Chisda explains it. Toveles v'acheles ad arba'im. No, it doesn't mean she has a blanket permission to go home and eat truma by tati. She can go home and eat truma by tati for a period of 40 days. Okay? The ilo mi abura, if she was not pregnant, hello mi abura, then she's not pregnant and she had no problem. She could eat truma. the imi bura, and if she did become pregnant by that act that night before her husband died, ad arbim maya bialmahi, for the first 40 days, the fetus is considered simply liquid and it's not a person. So it just because of current events, Judaism does not consider life begins at the moment of conception, as Christians do. Judaism considers that for the first 40 days, there's nothing. And for the rest of pregnancy, the infant is part of the mother. And it is only until his head and shoulders emerge that he's an individual, a distinct entity. What? Okay. So that's why she could eat. And when he said you could go home and eat, only that period of 40 days. If that's true, that she can eat for 40 days, what about the rest of the brisa that we just discussed? If her body starts showing signs of pregnancy, she gets the baby bump, right? Tehe mikukeles lemafreya. She is, quote, ruined retroactively. And at this point, the Havamina is retroactively to the night of the Bia. My Mekulkeles, what does it mean? She's ruined with quotes around it? Ad Arboim. No, Reb Chisda says, no. It's only from the baby bump retroactive to the 40 days after the Bia, because in this case, we know exactly when the Bia took place. They had sex once and he died. So we can target the Bia exactly. We can count the 40 days exactly. And that's where she goes back to. And she only is punished by paying back the value of the truma plus the fifth to her father from the 41st day on. Okay? Next. What? You have a question? Somebody had a... No? Okay. Itmar. We have another Bryce or something. Habo al arusosoi, the base chamid. Reuven and Sarah are getting married. They have Erusin, and then they have Nesuyin approximately a year later. Erusin, he buys her, quote unquote, she's now his wife. If she sleeps with anybody other than him, that she's adulterous. If she sleeps with him, that's a lav. So, but he doesn't want to wait. He climbs in the window in her father's house and they have sex illicitly during the interim period. Okay? Rav Aimer Havlad Mamzer. If this Arusa has a baby, even if both testify that we jumped the gun, Rav says, I don't care, the baby's a Mamzer. Shmuel Aimer Havlad Shtuki. The Vlad is only maybe a mamzer, and then we don't like making mamzerim, so we sort of ignore his problematic birth. Okay, but he's not a full-blown mamzer. Omer Rava Mistabra Milsida Rav. It makes sense that Rav means the daima mialma, where this woman has a bad reputation and we're concerned that if she'll sleep with the man she's not supposed to sleep with, her race, she might sleep with others too. And that's why Rav says the kids are mamzer, even if the parents testify they were together. But in a case where she's not suspected of anybody else, because the husband testified it in court that I was the one that was in bed with her. Basra di day dayan lay. We give her credit that she did sleep with her to-be husband, and the baby is not a mamzer. Umar Rava says, Mina minale. Why would I make that argument? Diktani, because our Mishnah says, Yolda Tochal. If the woman in the Mishnah has a baby and she's a and the man was a Kohen, she can eat truma based on the baby. What's the assumption? That it was the Kohen that impregnated her. We don't say every day she walks through the woods, she's probably getting raped every day. Or she had an affair with a Kohen, she probably had affairs with other men. We assume that if it's known that this was the affair, that the product of the affair is his kid. Hey, dummy, what's it equivalent to? If we're worried about her sleeping around, Yalda amai toichel, why would the baby enable her to eat truma? Elalav mine daima, we do not consider her as being suspected of sleeping around. Omar Hasam. So now let's go back to the Mishnah's case. The lahai isura, where she's not allowed to sleep with the Kohen because she's not married to him. And she's, of course, not allowed to sleep with other people either. Basra Day, the dine and lay. But we still, based on the circumstances, give her the credit that it was only the Kohen and the kid's a Kohen. So over here too with the Arusa case. The high Arusa lahai hetera, she that by other piece, I'm sorry, high isura lahai hetera, she's not allowed to sleep with other men under penalty of adultery. And with the man that she's going to be married to, it's only a lav if they wait a couple more days until they do nisuyin, it would be beheter gamor. So why? So lo kol shekeh. So why don't we say obviously the only man she slept with was her intended, and her ores, and the baby is fine. Amalei Abaya, so Abai explains it out. Li'olam Abai Abaya li'olam kol hechad the daimamine. We are always worried about her sleeping. When we are worried about her sleeping with the Erus, afal gaftala daimami alma, even though we don't think she has a whole bunch of boyfriends. Amarav Vlad Mamzer. Rav says, I don't care. The baby's a mamzer. My timer, what's Rav's rationale? The Amrinan, we make the following argument. The Mafkidra Nafshe Lagabe Arus. Since she did not protect her integrity regarding the Urus, she let him in the window and let him sleep with her. Afkira Nafshe Lalma. She's a loose woman. Who knows how many guys she's had sex with? Okay? And therefore the kid's a mamzer. So now we have a new question. If that's always the case, that the product of an illicit relationship is always a mamzer, even if it's taka your husband to be, then how could our Mishnah have labeled the kid a kosher kohen if it's the product of rape? So umas nisa, and what is our Mishnah talking about? Shahu shnehem chavushim bebeis asurim. It's a special case. It's where this girl has a paranoid father, and he always keeps her under lock and key. There's never any possibility of her being with another man. But she went to visit the caterer with her arusa, with her arus, and they were speeding and they got arrested, and the cop threw them both in the same cell. So prior to the time that the father came back to bail her out, she got pregnant. So here it's a certainty that the only man she could have been with is her intended, and therefore we don't have grounds to consider that she may be loose. Ikadamri, others explain the whole thing a little differently. Ba'aleha Dayara sleeps with her. Kula amalo pligi. The basre day, the danin lay, that we assume it's the Arus's son, and he's not a mamzer. V'hachi itmar. Here's what the argument is. Arusa she'ibura, if a girl who's an Arusa gets pregnant, and we do not know who the father is, Rav Omer Havlad Mamzer, Shmuel Omer Havad Shtuki. If we're not sure who the father is, Rav says we do not give her the benefit of the doubt, the kid's a mamzer, and Shmuel says we have to at least maybe give her the benefit of the doubt, the kid's a shtuki. Omer Rav, Mistabra Milsa de Rav, Rav explains, it's logical to understand that's what Rav means, the loy kaimamine, where we do not think that her husband to be climbed in the window. The ma'alma, but we are afraid that maybe she got in her last licks with an old boyfriend. Avo, daima mine, but where there is some grounds to assume she was too intimate with her to-be husband, even though we know she has a reputation for sleeping around, we make the assumption that if she fooled around, it was with her husband to be, and the baby is not a mamzer. Okay, and we'll continue.
Wait, I thought the 60s were a loose generation.
There's nothing new under the sun,
Yeah,
my
I
friend.
guess so. Man.
So I nobody ever arrested me when I was dating my wife.
It's not a Kohen. It's only the Kohen who are suspicious because we have truma and everything else. That's all.
Because the
Right?
evidence.
No, everybody. If the kid's a mamzer, it's a very bad implication. Forget trauma. You know how many mamzerim walking around?
No, Planned Parenthood gets rid of them all.
And you'll be amazed to see who they are.
Ah,
Well, some of them are really mamzerim.
Well, some today, I can tell them.
Anyone have 2 10s for 20 or 2 20s for 10?
Maybe.
Talk to your
I got
intended.
5 for 10 if you want. Got 2 10s?
You want 2 20s for a 10? It ain't happening. What? An emistika mamzer? Look, a mamzer tzaddik is on a higher madrega than Cohen Gadol Russia. You know, being a mamzer doesn't make you a bad person.
Thanks, Bob. You gave me 2 20s.
You gave it 2 20s? I asked for 2 20s for 10.
According to what we've been learning, every child where the woman is married to a non-Jew, the guy is every Jew who's married to a non-Jewish woman, the kids are mamzerim.
All I know is the women should be here to know proper behavior.
Hey, please. The women do know proper behavior. Even non-religious families
Okay.
frown on,